What's going on, everybody? We're live for the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show, Week 3. Go ahead and make sure you guys share out the stream so we can get everyone on it. Just going to give it a couple of minutes to let everybody get up in here, and we'll be starting very soon. Again, I would like to welcome you all to the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. We are live. Thank you guys again for coming in. This is going to be a great day. The best part is the Cleveland Browns have a chance to be over 500. And again, I would like to just thank you guys coming to the show. I'm just going to go ahead and share out the stream. We're going to go ahead and start in 60 seconds. If you guys can go ahead and share out the stream, that would be great. And again, we are live for the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. And thank you guys so much for coming out. We're going to start in 60 seconds, guys. Just going ahead and sharing out the streams so that way we can get everybody in here. And we can talk some Cleveland Browns. All right. What's going on, everybody? My name is Sean Stevenson. I am the host of the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. I would like to thank you all again for coming out and joining us today. It is week 3, and the Cleveland Browns have an opportunity to be over 502-1. The first time since 2014 the Browns could have a plus 500 record. I know you guys are excited. This is going to be a big opportunity for Baker Mayfield and Coach Kevin Stefanski to step up and make some big plays this week. Now, again, my name is Sean Stevenson. As you can see in the top and left right-hand corners, those are my socials. It's SHWN Stevenson, essentially my name without the A, and Sean. And I am a contributing writer for Sports Illustrated Browns Digest, which you guys can check out today. Actually, if you go on the website right now, that's www.si.com/NFL/Browns. You can see the how to watch the game thread. Also in a live game thread with updates throughout the game, updated by me, also joined with Pete Smith and Brandon Little. Like I said, you guys can go on the website right now and figure out different ways to watch the game. You also can listen to it on the radio as well. It's on 92.3 The Fan and 98.5 for those of you that are in Cleveland. And again, it is week 3, and I would like to thank you for joining the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. So let's go ahead and let's not even waste any time and hop straight into it. Lastly, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to go ahead and leave any comments or questions in the comment box below. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We're also live on the Browns Digest Facebook page. So wherever you see this, feel free to leave a comment, share it, and so we can get this discussion going. So it is week 3, the Browns versus Washington. They do kick off at 1 p.m. at FirstEnergy Stadium here in Cleveland. The last time these teams did meet up was in the preseason last year. The Browns actually end up winning that game 30-10. But again, week 1 of the preseason, you're essentially just trying to get out there, go against another team, and figure out what you have during training camp. Obviously, this year was a lot different, seeing by the fact that there was no training camp. Obviously, we hopped straight in with COVID going on, and they're having different health guidelines. So we just hopped straight into the regular season, and the Browns are currently 1-1 after dropping their first game to the Baltimore Ravens and then winning last week in primetime on Thursday Night Football against the AFC North rival, the Cincinnati Bengals. Currently, the Cleveland Browns are second in the league with 353 rushing yards. They're actually only 12th in attempts, which is really good. So they're definitely running the ball efficiently. And the run game behind Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt is the strong point of the Cleveland Browns, and it's only going to get better from here. And again, the Cleveland Browns have an opportunity to be over 500. Now, most of you guys that have been Cleveland Browns fans, we obviously haven't won a game in the season opener in 16 consecutive seasons, which is very tough. But obviously, there are a lot of things that's going to change. We have a new front office, a new coaching staff, and obviously, last week showed the potential of what the Cleveland Browns could be. And also, there's one thing that we know. They got to get the passing game started, jump-started, because obviously, they struggled a little bit in week 1, started to get the ball rolling in week 2. And if Baker Mayfield can play a clean game this week, I definitely believe he can build upon what he's been doing thus far and continue to prove why he should be a franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. Currently, the team is ranked 28th in the league, which is very, very bad in terms of passing yards with only 408 on the season. but obviously there's a opportunity for us to improve on that. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, we're sixth best in the league in terms of rushing yards allowed, only allowing 179 yards total in the last 2 games. They're limiting offenses to 3.3 yards per carry, which is great. Obviously, having a top 6 unit for your run defense is really good, seeing by the fact that our secondary and our linebacking core has been suffering for some injuries. So obviously you can stop the run game. It kind of limits what teams can do, and you can allow your defensive ends and your interior your interior defenders to essentially collapse the pocket and make it a little bit more difficult for the quarterbacks to throw the ball. Now, looking over to the Washington football team, they're currently 1-1 as well, beating the Philadelphia Eagles in week 1 and then losing their second game against the Arizona Cardinals last week on the road. Currently, they're 24th in the league in rushing the ball. So there's obviously some things that they need to pick up in terms of running the ball. They're struggling a little bit on that behalf, and they've actually ran the ball. They're 14th in attempts, so they're right beneath the Browns, but obviously they're not able to run the ball as efficiently as we are. Obviously, their running back core still has some questions with J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson not having that true runner, but they obviously still have some playmakers on the offense to make some things happen. Looking at their defense, obviously, they have a very stout front four, 2 solid linebackers in John Bostic and Kevin Pierre-Louis. So obviously, the front four is a strong part in this team, obviously led by the number 2 pick in this year's draft in Chase Young, the former Ohio State Buckeye. The man is extremely talented, generational pass rusher, obviously one of the best talents in this draft, and he's definitely going to be a game wrecker. So we're going to have to see how Kevin Stefanski and that offensive coaching staff are going to come out and figure out how to limit him. Obviously, him and Myles Garrett are some of the most dynamic edge rushers in the NFL, earlier in their careers. So it'll be interesting to see how Jedrick Wills or Jack Conklin will be able to line up against Chase Young. Now, looking at their passing game, obviously, the Washington Redskins passing game has been very limited. Obviously, don't have a lot of skill position players to really get the ball to, with Dwayne Haskins at quarterback, and they're actually the 29th worst, one behind the Cleveland Browns in terms of passing in the leagues thus far. And a lot of that does have to do with their first half struggles, which we'll get into early into this show. And one of the things that the Browns definitely have to do is, if they can limit the run game, which they've been doing thus far this season, and just put a stronghold on that passing game, this definitely can be another winnable game for them as they look again to go to 2-1 and have their first over 500 record since 2014. So let's go ahead and hop straight into the injury report. The Cleveland Browns thus far have definitely been suffering from the injury bug since training camp. Obviously, cornerback Greedy Williams, he's still out with a shoulder injury. He did have some practice this week, but again, there's no need to rush him back with Terrence Mitchell playing well on the outside. Looking at Olivier Vernon, he's been suffering from an abdomen injury. He did not play last week, so he's going to be out again this week. And then you have Jacob Phillips, who got hurt back in week 1 with a knee injury, and he's still out. And then also you have Adrian Claiborne, who's going to be out. That shouldn't be Adrian Claiborne. We do have another player that's out with a injury. I'm trying to remember who. I put the wrong thing in my notes. But Mac Wilson is actually going to be questionable. Sorry about that. I just had an extra play that was listed as out. Adrian Claiborne is questionable with the hip injury. Excuse me, just misread that. And then we have Mac Wilson, who's also questionable with the knee injury. Likely, probably not going to get many snaps if he does play. They obviously promoted Montreal Meter from the practice squad up to the active roster. No need to rush back Mac Wilson. Obviously, there's still some things to prove within that linebacking core with B.J. Goods and Sione Takitaki. But Matt Wilson, no need to rush back. Let him ease back into play as we go against teams that are a little bit more pass-oriented. Washington doesn't necessarily offer too much of an offensive threat in terms of throwing the ball in the air. And then lastly, the biggest question mark of this week is Denzel Ward, who's questionable with a groin injury. Obviously, the team decided to promote up A.J. Green from the practice squad with the new rules that you can promote 2 practice squad players on game day. A.J. Green, more suited to be an outside corner. They have been using Robert Jackson, but he's more of a special teams player. So in a situation that it's emergency that Denzel Ward cannot play, A.J. Green should likely step in and get some reps at outside corner. But luckily, the team does have Kevin Johnson, who's finally returning for his first game of the season after suffering from a lacerated liver back in training camp. Now, looking over to the Washington football team, as you guys may know, or some of you may not know, the Washington football team was previously known as the Washington Redskins. Obviously, after some offseason discussion, owner Dan Snyder decided to change the team name. But obviously, with everything going on with the pandemic and their limitations of what they could do, they're going to be rocking the name Washington football team and then likely rebranding next offseason. But getting to their injury report, they have Sadiq Charles, offensive tackle, who's out with a thigh injury. And then also linebacker Cole Holcomb. He's going to be out this game with a knee injury. And one of the big things, even though it's not listed on the injury report, their starting right guard, Brandon Sheriff, is out this week and out for the next 3 weeks as he was placed on a short-term IR after suffering a knee injury last week against the Cardinals. And obviously that's going to be a big hole on their offensive line, missing the 3-time Pro Bowl guard. He has been injury prone the last few years. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how the Browns interior on the defensive line will be able to take advantage of the weakening interior of the Washington offensive line. And then lastly, Steven Sims, receiver, he's listed as questionable with the toe injury, but he did have full participation this week. So he's likely to go, along with their right tackle, Morgan Moses, who is listed as questionable with the hip injury. He is likely to go as well. He was also had full participation in practice towards the end of the week. Now, again, the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show is hosted by Sports Illustrated, Browns Digest. You can check them out at www.si.com/NFL/Browns. And again, the Browns Digest is the sponsor of the Tailgate Recipe of the Week. And again, what would it be a tailgate without food? So this week, actually going to be a little bit different. We know it's going to be getting colder outside relatively soon. So no better way to warm yourself up than a nice bowl of chili. So we're going to go ahead and check out the tailgate recipe of the week, which is going to be 3-bean chili. And we'll be right back. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that is the tailgate recipe of the week, brought to you by Browns Digest over on Sports Illustrated. Feel free to check out the Sports Illustrated Browns Digest website during halftime. Again, for the video, you can check it out on Facebook and Instagram as well, so that you guys can have that 3-bean chili for you next week. So let's go ahead and get into this Cleveland Browns depth chart. Again, very minimal changes from what we've seen over the past few weeks. Starting quarterback Baker Mayfield, backed up by Chase Keenum. Looking at the running back position, which had a dominant game against the Cincinnati Bengals, we have Nick Chubb backed up with the two-headed monster, Kareem Hunt. And then lastly, we have our third running back in Dearness Johnson. Now, big news, obviously, we have the number 1 rated fullback based off of Pro Football Focus grades of the season thus far, Andy Janovich. Looking at our receiver positions, we have Odell Beckham Jr., who's looking to build upon a big game last week against the Cincinnati Bengals. We have Jarvis Landry, still waiting on that marquee game from him, but obviously still being that nice security blanket that Baker Mayfield can always count on in the intermediate parts of the field. We also have Kadero Hodge as a receiver 3, Rashard Higgins wrapping up the receiver group for receiver 4, and then we also have Donovan Peoples-Jones and JoJo Natson. Lastly, for the tight end group, for our skill positions, we have Austin Hooper, Harrison Bryant, and Steven Carlson. Obviously, David Njoku is still on IR. He's going to be out for 1 more week and then has the opportunity to be reactivated in week 5. Looking at our offensive line, which has been performing really well, we have the rookie left tackle and Jedrick Wills from Alabama, who's been playing great. Obviously, this is going to be a big matchup for him going up against Chase Young and Ryan Anderson and Ryan Kerrigan. It's obviously going to be a big game for Jedrick Wills. Backing him up, we have Kendall Lamb. Going over to the interior of the offensive line, we have Joe Bitonio, who's been playing great thus far this season. And then we have J.C. Treader and Nick Harris, the center 5th rounder from Washington. And then the number 1 graded right guard in the NFL, or offensive guard overall, according to Pro Football Focus, and Wyatt Teller, who has stepped up his game tremendously after being acquired last year from the Buffalo Bills. Bill Callahan has done an amazing job. Wyatt Teller has been a monster in the run game, and then he's backed up by Evan Brown, who can play all 3 interior spots, adding more additional depth. And then we have Jack Conklin, who's returning this week. He didn't play last week, obviously had some injury issues with that ankle and that finger, and he was replaced and played very solidly with Chris Hubbard, who's going to be our swing tackle for this week. Obviously, going through some of these grades on the offense, Andy Janovich, the number 1 rated fullback in the NFL. Obviously, fullbacks aren't used a lot, but it's very nice where you can have the number 1 rated fullback on your roster, knowing he's going to be a solid run blocker. Obviously, he's grading so far at a 74.3. Again, the highest grade according to Pro Football Focus. Looking at the tight end positions, obviously, there's some improvement that we would like to see from Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant. Harrison Bryant, so far, he's grading relatively below average. Only has a 56 grade, which is the 55th ranked highest tight end. Obviously, we just expect a little bit more from him. But the thing is, he's a rookie. The transition in the NFL for most rookie tight ends is relatively difficult. So there's obviously going to be some growing pains. But as long as he can come in and play that H-back role well and be obviously a good addition on that edge, setting some run blocks, then we'll be fine. Obviously, Austin Hooper has played relatively well in that tight end role. Hasn't necessarily gave the production in terms of receiving yards or just catches overall that we want from him, obviously because of the contract that they gave him. But with us being a run-first team, he does grade well in the run block. So that's obviously something we want to see him to continue to improve on. Looking at Jedrick Wills, he has a 66.4 grade, which is for the 44th highest rated tackle in the NFL. Obviously, being the 10th pick in the 2020 draft, we want to see him continue to build his portfolio and his resume against strong competition. Obviously, Chase Young, the Ohio State Buckeye, he's going to come in and he's going to be dominant off that edge. You have Ryan Kerrigan, you have Ryan Anderson. These are a lot of players that are very good against the Washington football team's defensive line. And we want to see Jedrick Wills hold up against his big competition. Obviously, Chase Young has the talent, the athleticism, and the speed to be a game wrecker, and it's going to be very important that Jedrick Wills is able to hold up against him or Jack Conklin, whoever he decides to line up against. Obviously, they're going to move him across that defensive line to try to get as many mismatches as possible. Then you look at the interior. Joe Bitonio, a mainstay. Obviously, he's the 8th eighth highest rated guard according to Pro Football Focus with an 80.7 grade. He's grading extremely well and pass blocking with 82.9, the highest, seventh highest of all guards in NFL so far this season. And you look at Wyatt Teller, the right guard, their number one rated guard in the NFL right now. Again, Bill Callahan has done an amazing job improving Wyatt Teller, his technique, his foundation, his foundational strength in his pass sets and his run blocking sets. Obviously, he was more of a pass blocking guard last season, but he's been able to become that mauler and that greater in the run game. You can watch last week on pulls, on whams, on blockbacks. He's been the one that's been essentially setting those lanes, help setting the edge against defensive ends and linebackers, getting to the second level, just opening up running lanes for Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And we can expect him to continue to run behind Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin on that right side of the offensive line. But obviously, the captain of that offensive line, the coach, making sure that everyone's on the same page is going to be J.C. Tretter. Obviously, he didn't work a lot in training camp as he was suffering from a knee injury, but as you've seen, he's off the injury report in terms of being questionable during the games. So he's getting back to full health. And obviously, the more reps we can get from him, the stronger that offensive line will be as they continue to build chemistry. So far, J.C. Tretter is the third highest ranked center in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus, with a 78.0 grade. He grades relatively well in both pass blocking and run blocking, with a 77.3 in pass block and 75.8 in run blocking. And then obviously, the biggest question mark, but not necessarily a question mark in terms of production and skill set, but just Jack Conklin in health. Obviously, he didn't play last week, but they did have him in an emergency role. But Chris Hubbard did step in well last week. Jack Conklin, still the 24th highest rated tackle in the league at a 73.1. That's only for one game. Obviously not playing last week against the Cincinnati Bengals. But now we also can feel confident with Chris Hubbard, who restructured his contract in the offseason as that swing tackle. And he did great with the 73.6 and is currently the 21st highest offensive tackle in the league, and had an 82.5 pass blocking grade against the Cincinnati Bengals, who have some relatively decent edge players. So obviously we can feel confident with Chris Hubbard coming in some heavy formations and coming in as that swing tackle. Now looking at the defensive side of the ball, we have Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett had that game-breaking game last week that we were expecting from him. Obviously, he had the big strip sack against Joe Burrow near the goal line. Obviously, that's huge for him because we've been waiting for that marquee game for Myles Garrett. Obviously, since he had that suspension last year because of the whole Mason Rudolph incident, but Myles Garrett is back. He looks like he's already in mid-season form. He's currently the fourth highest graded edge defender in the NFL with an 86.3 grade, with an 87.6 pass rush, which is third highest in the league. So we can definitely expect him to build upon and to take advantage of that weaker Washington offensive line. Obviously, Morgan Moses, he was dealing with a little bit of injury during this week, so we'll see how that hip is going for him. But obviously, that speed, athleticism, and just raw power of Myles Garrett is a force to be reckoned with, and we're expecting him to have another big game against a weaker Washington offensive line. Now, Adrian Claiborne is listed as questionable this week, but he has played relatively well in, the snaps that he has had. Well, with no Olivier Vernon, we can most likely expect Porter Gustin to step in and to be in that starting lineup this week. Porter Gustin, obviously, he's the reason why Chad Thomas is not on the team. Chad Thomas was a third-round pick out of Miami 2 years ago by general manager John Dorsey. But Porter Gustin, that athleticism that he showcased in USC, when healthy, obviously can have the opportunity to do some great things across from Myles Garrett on the opposite side of that defensive line. Obviously, that strip sack that Myles Garrett had against Joe Burrow, Porter Gustin was right there blowing up Joe Burrow on that sack. He did get fined for unnecessary roughness penalty later in the week. But the important thing is Porter Gustin is making the most out of his snaps. And sneakily, he's actually played the most snaps behind Myles Garrett at the defensive end position. And we're expecting him to just continue to grade well. He's currently grading a little bit above average with the 65.1 grade, according to PFF. And he has a relatively well pass rushing grade at 72.7. Now, moving over into the interior, again, the Browns have a very stout front four, similar to the Washington football team. You look at Sheldon Richardson, again, a great veteran along that defensive line. He has the most snaps in the interior. He's grading relatively well. He's the 16th highest graded interior defender with a 74.4 grade. Obviously, a really good run defender at 70.7 in run defense, according to PFF. Now you move over. You look at Larry Ogunjobi. Larry Ogunjobi is currently the second highest rated interior defender for the Cleveland Browns and in the NFL with an 86.7 grade, has a very, very dominant and the highest run defense grade of all interior defenders with a 92.6. So obviously we're looking for Larry Ogunjobi to continue to build upon that success. He's essentially in a contract year, looking to get a contract extension with the Cleveland Browns. Obviously having a front four where you can have a nice rotation is very important for Joe Woods in that defense. So obviously if Larry Ogunjobi can continue to play well in his role, he can likely earn himself a contract extension. Now you're looking at the rookie Jordan Elliott. Now Jordan Elliott is another player who's grading relatively well in the snaps that he's playing. He's now ranked the 11th highest grade interior defender according to PFF with a 78.2, and he has a 75.3 run defense grade. So obviously he's grading relatively well in terms of his run defense when he's on the field. Also, he was the #1 highest rated interior defender in terms of pass rush productivity and grade in the SEC last year, higher than first-round picks Javon Kinlaw for the 49ers and Derrick Brown for the Carolina Panthers. So we obviously want him to continue to grow within his pass rush production. He's currently graded at a 67.6 in terms of pass rushing grade. Now, looking at the linebacking core, obviously this has been the weak point for the Cleveland Browns this season, and we're looking for them to improve along the linebacking core. There's still some questions about Mack Wilson playing this week. Me personally, I don't believe he's going to be on the field much, if at all, this week. Obviously, he's still coming back for the knee injury that he hyperextended back during training camp. But again, the doctors are saying that it's healing nicely, and it's very strong chance that we'll see him next week. Now, looking at that will position, most likely we could expect Malcolm Smith to continue to be in that starting role, as the Browns have been mostly in their base defense, struggling with injuries in that secondary. Malcolm Smith so far is the 14th highest rated linebacker in the league. He has 68.9 grade, and he grades relatively decent in coverage with a 68.3. Obviously, he's a player that's a veteran, former Super Bowl MVP, and someone that just knows the nuances of playing in a defense, understanding where to be in his zone, how to cover tight ends, and just being a sure tackler within that second level. Now you look at B.J. Goodson. B.J. Goodson has the most snaps of all linebackers. He's the middle linebacker of this defense. We're obviously expecting more from him and really just to step up. He's grading relatively poor this year. He has a 42.1 grade, which is 56 of all linebackers. But the biggest thing with B.J. Goodson is that he has to improve in coverage. He has a horrendous 42.4 coverage grade according to PFF, and that's obviously something that we expect him to improve on. Tight ends and pretty much anywhere in the open parts of the middle parts of the field, quarterbacks has been able to find success. Obviously, Mark Andrews and Willie Snead torched the Browns in week 1, and Tyler Boyd and Logan Thomas was able, CJ Uzomah was able to get open for the Bengals, but obviously B.J. Goodson just has to perform better in coverage in the middle of the field, because obviously we can't have too many holes with Washington running that West Coast offense. And essentially, they're going to want to take advantage of short and intermediate routes across the middle of the field. Now you look at the Sione Takitaki, who has been grading relatively well this season. He has a 60.5 grade, which is 21st for linebackers. He's going to be that strong side linebacker for us. Obviously, he does have a little bit of inconsistencies in terms of coverage, but he's very good in the run game. Obviously, he plays well in terms of tracking blocks, scraping against the linebacker, the offensive line, and being able to make plays in the run game. And we want him to continue to grade well and be able to be a force in that run game. Currently, he's graded at a 72.4 in the run grade defense. Now, the biggest question mark for today is going to be the Browns secondary again. Obviously, there's going to be some big benefits of them getting Kevin Johnson back. He hasn't played so far this season. He suffered from a lacerated liver in training camp. So obviously this is going to be his first game back. So we have to see, where he is in terms of progress. They may limit his snaps, but one of the things that they're going to look at within his health is the health of Denzel Ward, who currently is suffering from a groin injury. He didn't practice on Friday. So hopefully, that groin is up to a standard that he can play this week. Obviously, he's our number one corner for this team. He limited AJ Green, who's been a Pro Bowl receiver for more years than not that he's been in the league. He limited him to 2 receptions for 15 yards. Obviously, if Denzel Ward can play this week, that is going to be a big matchup against Terry McLaurin on the opposite side. 2 former Ohio State Buckeyes, the teammates facing off for the first time in the NFL, since preseason. So obviously it's going to be huge for them in terms of that matchup. So far, Denzel Ward is the 15th highest graded cornerback in the league with the 71.2 with the 70.4 coverage grade. Obviously wanting to see him to continue to play well and to, be that security lockdown corner that we need on the outside and shadowing that number 1 corner. Then you look at Terrence Money Mitchell. Money Mitch has been playing extremely well. Obviously has the second most snaps on the outside and the second most snaps of all cornerbacks for the team thus far. He has a 68.7 grade, which is ranked for 23rd highest of all corners with a 67.5 coverage grade. Again, just another savvy veteran who's very good at tackling in the run game, coming up and giving that run support. And you just know he's always going to be around making the smart play, punching the ball when he's tackling receivers or running backs, increasing that chance for fumbles and giving the offensive more opportunities. Obviously, he is very turnover heady in terms of either getting an interception or just causing a fumble. We're going to look for Terrence Mitchell to continue his good play as Greedy Williams continues to heal up from that shoulder injury. Now you look at Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson, his first game of the year. Last year, he graded relatively well with the Buffalo Bills with the 71.9 grade, which is 23rd highest for all corners. So he obviously has that ability to perform well. Now, Kevin Johnson obviously is more of a nickel back corner, so you're going to expect for him to play more in the slot. But again, in a situation that Denzel Ward is not ready to go this week, expect him to slide, on the outside. And then in situations when they want to bring in AJ Green, you can expect him to be the outside corner with Kevin Johnson sliding in to the slot. Now, Tavier Thomas, obviously, he's been the person that's came in for Kevin Johnson in the slot, playing the most snaps that he's played in his career at cornerback. He's grading relatively average, below average with a 55.3 overall defensive grade, but you can expect him to, again, perform well on special teams. And in a situation that Denzel Ward is not able to go, expect him to come in as well to continue to play those snaps at the nickel back. And then don't be surprised if he's also in dime situations when they want to bring in AJ Green as well. Now, this isn't even a question mark. This is just a group that needs to perform better. Simply put, the Brown safeties have not performed well, and it's time for them to step it up. First, you look off at Carl Joseph, both of whom are on a 1-year contract. So obviously, this is a prove-it deal for them in order for them to get a long-term deal, either with the Browns or with another team. Carl Joseph, for the most part, he's been relatively below average, but he's been giving us decent play. He's 52.8 in terms of defensive grade, which is 54th for all safeties. But obviously, you want to expect more from him. He's been grading relatively below average in terms of coverage. He's decent in terms of run defense, but obviously we're just expecting more from him in terms of covering tight ends and just being more of a force within that run game. Obviously, he's going to be more of your traditional box safety, but does have their, the skill set to play a little bit deep cover too, if need be. Now, Andrew Sendejo. It's been 2 weeks. He just hasn't played relatively well, and we're just expecting more from him. Obviously, if he can step up and provide just some consistency as that deep free safety, obviously the Browns can, be a little bit more comfortable in that cover 3 look. But he's always just been a step behind, in plays. Obviously, he's been struggling with receivers that have a lot of speed. Obviously, you look at Steven Sims. You look at Terry McLaurin, a little bit of Dontrell Inman. These are going to be receivers that have a little bit more speed. They're going to look to get vertical on some plays, and those are the plays that we need Andrew Sendejo to make. He's always just been one step behind. So the biggest improvement that we can look for Sendejo this week is just to be in the right spots, make the smart plays, and not give up too much. If he can do that, obviously we can expect him to improve. He only has a 42.5 grade, which is relatively poor, according to Pro Football Focus, but we've seen it, each week. We expect him to step up. But one of the things that we could likely expect this week is a little bit more big dime packages when they bring in additional safety. We can likely expect Ronnie Harrison, who they traded a 5th-round pick to Jacksonville during training camp. We could expect him to get some more reps this week. Obviously, he had that good feel-good story this week in the news, helping someone with a spare tire off on the freeway. So obviously, hopefully some of that good vibes can carry over to the football field. We can get Ronnie Harrison some more snaps on the defensive side of the ball, rather than be a big dime or just bringing some depth behind Carl Joseph, Andrew Sendejo. And then obviously we have Sheldrick Redwine, who played well in some free safety snaps last season. Now, again, I just want to thank you guys for coming to the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. Now, the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show is not directly attributed to the Cleveland Browns or the NFL. This is strictly for open discussion and communication regarding the Cleveland Browns. This is not directly attributed to the NFL or the Cleveland Browns. But again, I want to thank you guys for coming to the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. Now, the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show is sponsored by Focus Clothing. Focus Clothing is a Cleveland-based Black-owned clothing business. You guys can go ahead and check them out at www.focusclothingcle.com/shop. They do have new apparel with new hoodies coming out soon. You guys can check them out. Again, that's Focus Clothing, and follow them on social media at Focus Clothing CLE.
Who said that t-shirt was only for the summer?
Again, Focus Clothing, a Cleveland-owned, Black-owned clothing business here in Cleveland. Go ahead and check them out. Again, that's at FocusClothingCLE.com, and they are the sponsor of the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. So let's go ahead and get into the Washington football team and their depth chart. The starting quarterback, last year's first-round pick in the 2019 draft, former Ohio State quarterback Dwayne Haskins Jr. Obviously, he has struggled a little bit this season in terms of getting off to a fast start. He struggled relatively in the first half, and that's something that we're hoping that the Browns can take advantage of. Obviously, head coach Ron Rivera, who's the first-time head coach with the Washington Redskins, is looking for him to get off to a faster start. But if the Browns can continue to, pressure him and cause, potentially an interception or a turnover, he has been a little bit turnover prone in terms of fumbles during his time from holding the ball too long. So there's obviously an opportunity that either a free blitzer or the Browns defensive line can take advantage of. He is backed up by former Panther Kyle Allen and obviously Alex Smith, who was finally able to be promoted to football activity in terms of his health. So that's obviously really good for Alex Smith. He suffered that horrendous leg injury a few seasons ago. So he obviously most likely won't be playing this week. But again, it is nice to see that Alex Smith is healthy enough to be back on, an active depth chart. Looking at the running back position, they have J.D. McKissick, who they signed this year to a multi-year deal. And then they have rookie Antonio Gibson from Memphis. Antonio Gibson is more of that hybrid receiver/running back back in college. So he's obviously a player that has a lot of athleticism in the open field. He can make defenders miss, obviously make, plays with the ball in his hands. So expect them to try to get, the ball in his hands, either out of the backfield or running the ball. And they also have Peyton Barber, who signed with them from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then they have Stanford running back Bryce Love as well to round out that running back group. Looking at the receivers, obviously their number one receiver and the most targeted receiver on the team by a relatively large margin, Terry McLaurin. And then they have Dontrell Inman, Antonio Gandy Golden, the rookie out of Liberty. And then they have Cam Sims. Moving over to the slot, they have Steven Sims, a very speedy receiver that you could expect to, get some play. Again, they do run that spread offense in terms of running 11 personnel with 3 receivers on the field. So you can expect Steven Sims to be on the field. He's backed up by Isaiah Wright. Looking at the tight end position, you have Logan Thomas, who's the second most targeted receiver/tight end on the team. He's backed up by Jeremy Sprinkle and Marcus Bowe. Now moving over to the offensive line. The offensive line for the Washington football team is relatively weak. They're not one of the better units in the league, with most of their players grading relatively average or below average. Obviously, they're missing the three-time Pro Bowler Brandon Sheriff, who they lost to IR last week. So this is a big opportunity for the Browns defensive line to continue to build upon, the success they've been having in terms of run defense, but obviously, getting to the quarterback more in terms of pass rush productivity. Looking at the left tackle, they have Jerron Christian. He's grading at a 55.2, which is for 67th highest rated offensive tackle. He's relatively more of a run blocker, grading at 57.7 in terms of run block grade, and his 54.0 pass blocking grade is relatively below average. So obviously, they don't have the strongest left tackle, but this is a good opportunity for Porter Gustin to grade well in terms of, starting reps and not having that uber good left tackle to go against in his first start in the NFL. So obviously this is going to be a good matchup for Porter Gustin to, obviously get his feet wet and being a starter most likely this week. Then he's backed up by David Sharp. Moving over to the interior, you have Wes Martin, who has graded below average, to put it nicely, at that left guard position. He's graded at a 48.9 for 61st worst offensive guard. He only has a 48.2 pass blocking grade and a 48.9 run blocking grade. So obviously Wes Martin is going to be a offensive guard that we're looking to take advantage of with Sheldon Richardson, Jordan Elliott, and Larry Ogunjobi. And then obviously moving over to the right guard position, Wes Schweitzer is going to be the one that's going to be replacing Brandon Sheriff. He's only played 43 snaps so far this season, which was in week 2. He did great at a 54.0 grade. More of a run blocking right offensive guard. He has a 58.0 run blocking grade, but has graded extremely poorly in pass blocking protection with a 38.3 pass blocking grade. So obviously we want Larry Ogunjobi to take advantage of that and get some pressure on the interior. Moving in, finishing up the interior, all the offensive line, you have Chase Roulier, who's the 26th highest rated, again, towards the lower end of the spectrum. There's only usually a couple centers that play out of the 32 teams. So usually it's about out of 34. Chase Roulier is at the bottom half of the league in terms of PFF grade with a 59.0. He is better at pass protection, grading relatively average with the 63.5. Doesn't do that well in run blocking grade at 56.3. So obviously there's going to be some struggles in terms of the run game for the Washington football team. They don't have a lot of really good run blocking offensive linemen. So, obviously that's one of the reasons why they're rated lower in terms of run blocking, run productivity on the offensive side of the ball. And then obviously their passing game has been lackluster because obviously you don't have any time. Dwayne Haskins has had some struggles of holding the ball too long. And obviously, when your offensive line isn't, giving you clean pockets or giving you enough time to throw the ball, or sometimes your receivers aren't just getting open, obviously that puts more pressure on the offensive line, and they don't have the strongest, skill positions in order to get the ball out quickly or expect them, to be a lot of man beaters. And then lastly, their best offensive lineman is going to be Morgan Moses, who is the 38th highest offensive tackle according to Pro Football Focus with a 68.7. He grades relatively well at run blocking with a 68.9 run blocking grade, and he has a 62.8 pass blocking grade. Obviously, he's going to have his hands full against Myles Garrett, who having a wonderful game against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 2. So obviously, he's going to have a tough matchup with Myles Garrett, who's very athletic, and he's also nursing that hip injury. So obviously, if he's not as nimble, as the Washington football team would like for him to be, Myles Garrett can take advantage of that matchup. He's backed up by Cornelius Lucas, and then lastly, Keith Ismail is going to be that overall offensive lineman who's going to back up all 3 interior offensive line positions. Now going over to the defensive side of the ball, the front 4 for this Washington football team is monstrous. You have the number 2 overall pick in Chase Young out of Ohio State. He's currently the 8th highest rated edge defender in the NFL right now, which is huge. Obviously, he has, world beating talent, athleticism, power, speed. He's a technician, and obviously he's going to be a game record. If the Browns don't have a good scheme in order to keep him contained and limit his impact, obviously he's going to line up against both Jack Conklin and Jedrick Wills. Obviously they might try to take a little bit more advantage of Jedrick Wills being the rookie not being as savvy as the veteran Jack Conklin, but it's obviously going to be a matchup to watch whatever side Chase Young decides to line up on. He currently has an 81.1 grade according to Pro Football Focus with the 72.4 pass rushing grade and a very good run defense grade with the 77.3. Across from him, they have Montez Sweat, who's grading relatively average with the 58.3. They drafted him in the first round last year. Obviously, out of Mississippi State, he is more of a run defending defensive end, but they're expecting more for him in terms of pass rushing productivity. He grades at a 62.2 at pass rush, but obviously they're looking for a little bit more out of Montez Sweat. But he's a relatively tall guy at 6'6", so obviously Baker Mayfield could run into some trouble with, balls being batted down at the line of scrimmage. That was something that he struggled with Calais Campbell batting down 2 passes in week 1. So obviously we want to see Baker Mayfield slide in the pocket as much as possible in order to combat passes being batted down at the line of scrimmage by Montez Sweat or Chase Young. And then obviously they have the veteran in Ryan Kerrigan, who has always been a stalwart in terms of pass rushing. Obviously he is on the back end of 30. So, some of his best days are behind him being in the back end of his prime, but he's also still someone that can give you very quality snaps in a sub package rushing the passer. He grades at 67.1 pass rushing grade. So obviously Ryan Kerrigan, someone that's been in the Pro Bowl, and he's going to, provide, really good pass rushing snaps. And, in the situation that Chase Young or Montez Sweat does kick in the interior in sub packages, potentially they could even run NASCAR when they bring in 4 defensive ends, and they're going to be backed up by Ryan Anderson and James Smith-Williams. Looking at the interior of the defensive line, they have Darren Payne and Jonathan Allen, 2 former Alabama Roll Tide players. Obviously, the Browns have some Alabama players on their defense, but Darren Payne and Jonathan Allen are some very talented players on the interior. Darren Payne grades at 65.1, and he obviously provides a lot in terms of pass rushing and providing pressure up the middle in the interior with a 68.2 pass rushing grade. And then obviously Jonathan Allen, who was a first-round top 10 pick for the Washington Redskins at the time. Jonathan Allen is grading at 71.5, which is for 25th highest in the league. Obviously, just overall, he's very good in both run defense and getting pressure up the middle on the interior. So you can expect Jonathan Allen and Darren Payne, obviously, to give, Wyatt Teller and Joe Bitonio and JC Tretter a run for their money. Obviously, they are some great players. And then you look at Matt Ioannidis. Matt Ioannidis led the team last year in snaps. Even though he's not a starter on the interior, he is someone that they definitely trust in pass rushing and sub packages. Currently, he has a 78.6 pass rushing grade, which is for the top 15th highest in the NFL for interior defenders. So obviously, it's going to be big when Matt Ioannidis comes in passing situations that they're able to pick him up, because he's obviously shown the ability to create pressure up the middle and to collapse the pocket. And obviously, for Baker Mayfield being a shorter quarterback, pressure up the middle, is something that you don't want a lot of. When he's standing in the pocket, that may cause him to, scramble out of the pocket, and that will leave him closer to Chase Young on those scramble situations. And obviously, you don't want Baker Mayfield to, getting chased down by Chase Young, ironically, or Montez Sweat. So obviously, the front 4 of that Washington's football team defensive line is going to be big for them, but it's also going to be a good test for the Cleveland Browns offensive line, and it's definitely going to be one of the matchups to watch for this game. Now, moving over to their linebacking core, obviously this team, their front 7, more of a front 6, because they only use 2 linebackers for the most part. Sean Dion Hamilton, which is their wheel, has only played 21 snaps this season, and he has graded really poorly, especially in coverage. He has a 27.6 grade with a 27.5 overall defensive grade, so you won't expect a lot of Dion Hamilton on the field. But you look at their Mike and Sam with John Bostic and Kevin Pierre-Louis. Kevin Pierre-Louis, who they signed from the Chicago Bears, is building upon that strong season he had last year with the Bears. He's currently rated as the fourth best graded linebacker in the NFL with an 84.0 grade. And part of that reason is because he has the highest coverage grade of all linebackers with a 90.5 grade. And obviously, that's going to be big for them. When you look at Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant, the Washington football team feels confident in Kevin Pierre-Louis's ability to cover tight ends. And that's going to be a tough matchup for the Browns because obviously the tight ends haven't gave us the production that we've wanted thus far this season. And this is going to be another tough matchup for them because obviously Kevin Pierre-Louis grades really, really well, being the highest graded linebacker in terms of coverage in the NFL. Then you have John Bostic, who's not necessarily a world beater. He played over 1,000 snaps last season, but he's, again, someone, that's a veteran. He did play with the New England Patriots. So obviously he did learn a lot from Bill Belichick at that time, playing with them, winning a Super Bowl. But again, just provides, veteran leadership in the middle of that defense as the Mike. He does great as the 29th highest rated linebacker in the NFL with a 54.8 grade. Again, he doesn't do one thing particularly well over the other, but he's someone that plays well in terms of the middle of the field and being that veteran to make plays. Then you look at their secondary cornerback, Kendall Fuller. This is going to be his first game of the season thus far, and it's going to be, again, big for another player that hasn't played this week, similar to Kevin Johnson, where, they suffered from some injuries back in training camp and they're looking to finally, get back. And there's going to be an adjustment period, just getting back to that NFL game speed. So that's definitely a matchup we want to watch. Kendall Fuller, obviously, didn't play relatively well at all with the Kansas City Chiefs, playing on the outside, but he did get a Super Bowl ring. So, he did what was necessary, but he has definitely played better in the slot. So you can likely expect him to, be on a snap count and matching up against Jarvis Landry in the slot. And then you look at Ronald Darby from the Philadelphia Eagles. He's trying to resurrect his career. And thus far, he's playing relatively well this season. He's the 12th highest rated corner in the league with a 72.3 grade. And he has a 69.9 coverage grade. Obviously, Ronald Darby has athleticism. He has all the physical traits of a good corner on the outside. So obviously Ronald Darby is likely going to be matched up against Odell Beckham Jr. And Ronald Darby is a very feisty corner. So, expect him to get physical, expect him to get in the face of Odell Beckham Jr. and try to, bait him into some bad plays or, get him frustrated. And it's definitely a mental game with Odell Beckham Jr. If you can knock him off his game, sometimes that causes some issues for Beckham. You can expect Ronald Darby definitely to be that Marcus Peters for this Washington football team in terms of being that man cover corner that's going to try to get in the face of, your number one receiver. And then they also have Jimmy Moreland, who's graded at 51.9, only for 73rd. Obviously, his coverage grade is pretty poor at a 48.9, so that they are not expecting Jimmy Moreland to, be that number 2 corner that he's been so far this season, and obviously try to get Kendall Fuller in more so far this season. They do typically run 3 cornerbacks, throughout the game, only running with 2 linebackers. So expect, Kendall Fuller. And then they also have Fabian Moreau, who has graded relatively well in coverage. He has a 75.5 coverage grade, which is 5th highest overall for defensive grade, with a 75.5 as well for all corners. But he's obviously only played 72 snaps, so it's been limited in terms of that. But when he has been on the field, he has been a relatively good cover corner. So likely you could expect more of the snap count to come down, with Fabian's going up and Kendall Fuller coming in, taking snaps from Moreland as well. They're backed up by Danny Johnson and third-round corner Greg Stroman. Now, looking at their safety position, they added former Giants safety Landon Collins, who's obviously he's been a little bit shaky in terms of his career. Some years he grades well in run defense. Some years he grades well in coverage. This is a coverage year for him, having a 70.1 coverage grade. He's the 26th highest rated safety in the league. But, there's obviously been some inconsistencies in his game. Like I said, some years he's really good in the run. Some years he's good in the pass. It just happens to be a year that he's good in the pass. So obviously he's more of that traditional box safety, and you could expect him to, again, be covering, tight ends off the line of scrimmage, whether it be Austin Hooper or Harrison Bryant. And again, they're going to feel relatively confident with Kevin Pierre-Louis as those two covering the tight ends for the Browns, since the Browns do run a lot of 12 personnel with 2 tight ends on the field. And then you look at Deshaun Everett as the backup, and then Troy Apke. Troy Apke, the free safety for them, has been playing poor this season with a 42.9 grade. He's the 64th lowest safety so far this season. He only has a 48.7 coverage grade, so obviously there's a lot left to be expected from him. They're obviously expecting a better performance from Apke so far this season, which he hasn't been able to provide, and he's backed up by Cameron Curl. So obviously this is going to be a big game for the Browns in terms of taking advantage of that safety group and their secondary that still has some questions. But again, the Washington football team, that defense is all set up by that front 4 and that defensive line that they boast. Now, looking at the offensive defensive schemes for each team, the Cleveland Browns offensive scheme, again, they're going to be heavy on that 12 personnel. So expect Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant to be on the field a lot. Obviously, Austin Hooper has graded relatively well in terms of his run blocking grade. So you wanted to see him continue with that, running that outside zone. Expect a lot of pulls, a lot of wham blocks from the offensive guards, Joe Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, to open up holes for both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And essentially, the offensive scheme has been you feed Nick Chubb in the first half, expect 20-plus carries from him, and then obviously on the backhand side of the game, Kareem Hunt comes in, and, you have Nick Chubb that's constantly running the ball, constantly turning his legs, tiring out that defense. You have Kareem Hunt who come in with fresher legs and essentially close out the game for you. What they've done so far this season, which worked out relatively well. And look for Kevin Stefanski to build upon that with that offensive run game. And then you look at the defensive scheme with Joe Woods running that 4-3 under. Obviously, the defense has been giving up a lot of pass yards, a lot of points. You're expecting them to set it down and to find some consistency this week. Joe Woods obviously is looking for some improvement, getting Kevin Johnson back. Obviously, Denzel Ward is likely to play this week. But again, we just want to see some improvements in that secondary and especially that linebacking core. Going over to the Washington football team, they run a traditional West Coast offense. So that's going to be a lot of quick passes, looking to get slants, drags, get players out into open space and allow them to use their, athletic ability to make players miss in open space. They do run a lot of 11 personnel, so essentially 3 receivers. That's going to be with Terry McLaurin, Dontrell Inman, and Steven Sims in the slot. And then again, they do have J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson, 2 kind of hybrid players that have ran pretty well with the ball in their hands, but have obviously produced more in terms of catching passes out of the backfield. Now, with some matchups to watch this week, obviously the biggest one, the 2 former teammates from Ohio State, Denzel Ward versus Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is a very fast receiver. He had 7 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown last week, and he's the most targeted receiver on the team. Obviously, Denzel Ward is nursing that groin injury, so it's going to be big for them because he's one of those speedy receivers. And Terry McLaurin, obviously being the most targeted, Dwayne Haskins is always looking for him. So if Denzel Ward is healthy enough for this game, expect him to shadow Terry McLaurin a lot this game. And that's definitely going to be a big matchup because Terry McLaurin has essentially been the productivity and the production in the passing game for the Washington football team. Now moving over to the Browns. You look at the Browns and their offensive line. They have to play well against this Washington defensive line. Like I just talked about on their depth chart. They have a lot of talent across that front 4 of that defensive line. And if they start, causing pressure and creating pressure and really interior pressure more than anything, that could definitely cause trouble for Baker Mayfield because obviously when you have pressure coming up the middle, you have to scramble either to the left or to the right, and you're running into 2 bigger players. One, you have Chase Young, who's extremely talented, and then Montez Sweat at 6'6". That obviously caused some issues in terms of getting passes to players with either passes being batted down at the line of scrimmage or not just being able to find players out on the outside. And then lastly, again, the Browns linebackers versus Logan Thomas. Now, Logan Thomas isn't the greatest tight end in the world, but he's the 2nd most targeted player on the team with Dwayne Haskins. So obviously he's going to be looking for him. And why not? B.J. Goodson has not graded well in coverage in the middle of the field. Andrew Sandejo, Carl Joseph hasn't really, done a lot in terms of covering tight ends so far this season. So expect Logan Thomas, get targeted. But it all starts with the Browns linebackers. He can't have easy releases off the line. They need to beat him up as much as possible within that 5-yard mark and not allow free releases in the middle of the field, which has the Cleveland Browns defense has struggled thus far this season. But obviously, the biggest thing is making sure that they can limit players as much as possible in terms of what the tight ends can produce this season. Again, I would like to thank you guys for joining me with the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. The Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show is brought to you by Sports Illustrated, Cleveland Browns Digest. You can check us out at www.nfl.com, or excuse me, www.si.com/NFL/Browns. Again, we do provide daily articles led by lead editor Pete Smith, always providing articles, different insights, whether it be about the games, different players. And then we have injury reports, where to watch the game, which is up now, produced by Brendan Little, also with injury reports each week. Again, you can check us out at si.com/NFL/Browns. Again, I am a contributing writer with SI as well, providing a weekly column. And again, the Cleveland Browns pregame tailgate show is brought to you by Browns Digest. Now let's get into the quarterback comparisons. Obviously, this is going to be huge for the Browns this week. You look at Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield obviously is looking to improve on his play from last week, where he was finally able to get some things started. He was 16 for 23 for 219 yards for 2 touchdowns and interceptions. His raw QBR was 110. Obviously, that's before they go back and look at the games. Currently, he's only the 26th highest rated quarterback with the 63.9 overall grade, and we're looking for him to improve on that with the 63.5 passing grade. Obviously, he did not have a good week against the Baltimore Ravens, but he can build upon that, good game he had against the Cincinnati Bengals in prime time on Thursday night. And honestly, the team really starts and ends with Baker Mayfield, because obviously the run game is the foundation of this offense with the outside zone or inside zone. But Baker Mayfield and his consistency as a passer is going to be very important, because one, when he's able to pass the ball effectively, it limits defense's ability to have 8 men in the box to limit your run game. And then obviously last week he played really well off of play action. The first 2 passes that he threw were to Jarvis Landry and Kadero Hodge, and then obviously that play action shot that he had down the field with Odell Beckham Jr. in one-on-one coverage obviously was for a touchdown. And we want him to continue to build upon that success that he had last week. Obviously last week he had the highest QBR according to ESPN. Their adjusted QBR, they go back and watch the games for every single play, and Baker Mayfield led all QBs, and we want to see him to continue to build upon that success and play better and better each week. Now, flipping over to Washington, you look at Dwayne Haskins. Dwayne Haskins has struggled mightily in terms of bringing production in the first half. Obviously, as you can see, he's been starting off slow. He's only completed 50% of his passes, has 1 touchdown with 1 fumble. So obviously he's shown the ability to turn the ball over. Obviously has thrown some interceptions as well. But the biggest thing with Dwayne Haskins, again, he just starts off slow. Last week he was 19 for 33 for 223 yards, with majority of that production coming in garbage time. He hasn't eclipsed the 100-yard mark yet in the first half. So obviously the Browns have to take advantage of that, running the ball, limiting their opportunities. And they've punted on 10 of 14 possessions in the first half. So obviously if the Browns defense can step up, they can give more opportunities for the Browns offense, because the Washington offense hasn't been able to perform relatively well. So obviously I'm going to have to give my who you got to the Browns and Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield obviously looking to build upon that success that he had last week, and this is going to be an easy one. I got Baker Mayfield and the benefit going to the Cleveland Browns. Now, looking at the running back position, the two-headed monster, the best duo in the NFL with the Browns, with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb last week on 22 carries had 124 yards for 2 touchdowns for a 5.6 yards per attempt average, which is huge. When you look at what he's able to do in terms of offensive production, so far this season, he has a 75.8 grade, which is 6th highest for all running backs. He's been able to be very consistent on the ground in terms of showing patience, power, vision, being able to find cutbacks. But the biggest thing is, once he finds the hole, he shows that burst where he's able to get through the hole quickly, and he always keeps his legs churning, to fight for those extra yards. And he's going to be that bell cow for this offense in that first half, running the ball a lot with him. And then obviously when you get to the 3rd and 4th quarter, they look to switch over to Kareem Hunt to essentially close out the game. Last week with 10 carries, he had 86 yards for a huge 8.6 yards per carry average. And he had 2 total touchdowns, 1 on the ground and 1 through the air. He's the 13th highest graded running back with a 71-point overall grade. Obviously he offers a lot in terms of catching passes out of backfield, being 12th highest graded running back and receiving grade with the 68.6. And this is an easy one. Obviously the Browns have the better duo of the two, because there's obviously a lot unproven in terms of the Washington football team's backfield. With Antonio Gibson last week with 13 carries, he only had 55 yards, but did have a 4.2 yard per carry average and a rushing touchdown towards the back end of the game. He's currently graded as the 14th highest running back with the 68.4 grade this season, but his 75.2 rushing grade is really relatively well this season, and that's obviously something he wants to continue to build upon. Now, at Memphis in college, he was a receiver/running back hybrid, so there's some things that he offers in both facets of the game as a running back, but he just has that athleticism and skill set to really be, a playmaker for that offense, which the Washington football team is still looking for. And then also you have J.D. McKissick on 8 carries. He had 53 yards with a 6.6 yards per carry average. He has been more of that traditional third down back, catching passes out of the backfield, but he has ran the ball relatively well so far this season. But again, this is an easy one. The Browns, I have them as the better running back duo. Obviously, they have the best running back duo in the NFL, and there really won't be many, if any, teams at all that can top what the Browns have in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Now, going over to the receivers, you look at Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr., Kadero Hodge. Obviously, you want to see more, production out of that receiver group. Last week, Odell Beckham Jr. had 4 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown on 6 targets. We want to see him to continue to improve on that. Obviously, he had a poor game week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens, but obviously with Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, they have arguably one of the best cornerback duos in the league. This week, they get to go against, a little bit easier, but I would say more stiffer competition compared to the Cincinnati Bengals last week. Obviously, Ronald Darby is likely going to be the person that's going to match up against Odell Beckham Jr. And then you have Jarvis Landry, who's going to be that Z receiver and also lining up in the slot when Kadero Hodge comes in. Last week, he caught all 3 of his targets for 46 yards. And obviously, he hasn't had that huge game yet. But again, he's that security blanket, that he's always been. And when you need a big play to be made on third down, Jarvis Landry has always been that receiver to make those plays. And then obviously Kadero Hodge, off that play action play, he averaged 19 yards per reception last week. So obviously when he comes in, he's that player that, offers more speed. Rashard Higgins is going to be inactive this week. So obviously you're going to expect him to come in and to, again, provide, that vertical deep threat for the offense and be able to provide more for them. Now you look at Washington and the receiving core. Obviously, the only player that has really showed any consistent production, but obviously he has the highest target share, is Terry McLaurin. Last week, he had 7 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. He's the 18th highest rated receiver so far in the NFL with a 76.1 overall offensive grade, and he's the 14th highest in terms of receiving grade with 76.9 according to Pro Football Focus. Terry McLaurin, he's one of those players where he makes a lot of his plays underneath. He has 4.3 speed. He was dominating against the Cardinals last week on slant routes. So it's going to be huge in-man coverage for Denzel Ward and really the health of that groin injury for him to limit essentially that chemistry that Terry McLaurin and Dwayne Haskins is carrying over from their days of being teammates at Ohio State. Obviously, most of us being Browns fans, for us being in Ohio, our Ohio State Buckeye fans, so we know the potential that Dwayne Haskins and Terry McLaurin have in terms of their production, and they're going to look to build upon that. And obviously, it's going to be huge for the Browns' defensive back group to limit Terry McLaurin as much as possible. And you look at Steven Sims in the slot; he has a 66 overall grade. He had 3 receptions on 53 yards on 5 targets last week, and then they have Dontrell Inman outside as well. Not really, the greatest receiver, but he's still someone that, provide production for that receiver group. But this one, obviously, I'm going to give to the Cleveland Browns, again, with the advantage. Now, Terry McLaurin obviously has a better production in terms of, what he's done so far this season compared to Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry. But obviously, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, and Kadero Hodge, it's a more talented group, and they have a more talented skills position in terms of their wide receivers. Now, moving over to the tight ends, you look at the Cleveland Browns and what they have in Austin Hooper. Obviously, Austin Hooper hasn't done a lot in terms of receiving productivity, but we're expecting him to continue the success he's had run blocking. With a 79.2 run blocking grade, he's actually the 4th highest graded tight end, according to Pro Football Focus, in run blocking grade. So obviously, he's been able to seal the edge in that outside zone scheme, and we want to see him to continue that success. Obviously being a run-first team for the Cleveland Browns. And then you look at you look at Harrison Bryant, the rookie, 4th-round pick. We want to see him to continue just to learn and be consistent, whether it be blocking or catching passes. He only gets a couple targets a game, but we just want to see him make the most out of those opportunities. They're also going to have a tough matchup against Landon Collins and Kevin Pierre-Louis this week. So obviously, we don't want to see them, try to perform as best as possible this week. And you look at the Washington football team and their tight end group. I don't want to be that person, but I have to be that person. They have arguably the worst tight end group in the league. They're led by Logan Thomas. Last week had 4 receptions for 26 yards, but he brought in 9 targets. He only has a 59.2 receiving grade, so obviously there's still, some room for improvement for that, but he does great well in terms of run blocking with the 71.0 overall run blocking grade. But again, they don't have the greatest group, of tight ends. He's backed up by Jeremy Sprinkle and Marcus Bowe, so obviously there's some things that they want to see from the tight end group that they just haven't got yet, but I wouldn't really expect too much coming from them in that group. So obviously I have to give this one to the Cleveland Browns for the better tight end group. Now you look at the offensive lines. Again, this is another easy one. The Cleveland Browns, they're again showing that they have the offensive advantage across essentially all position groups. They have the quarterback, the running back, the receivers, the tight ends, the offensive line. You look at Jedrick Wills, Joe Bitonio, J.C. Treader, the number 1 rated guard, and Wyatt Teller, and then Jack Conklin, who's coming back healthy. And you can even feel confident about Chris Hubbard as your swing tackle. They're healthy. They're all building chemistry. They're playing better. So obviously I have to give this one to the Cleveland Browns for the better offensive line group, which is not that hard to do because obviously the Washington football team and their offensive line has not graded relatively well. You look at Jerron Christian, Wes Martin, Chase Roullier. They're all grading below average. Wes Martin has a 48.9 overall offensive grade, which is not good at all. Obviously, this is going to provide an opportunity for Sheldon Richardson and Larry Ogunjobi to take advantage of that. Wes Schweitzer, he's not the starter. He's going to be the starter this week, but he's not their intended starter at that right guard position with them missing Brandon Sheriff. Obviously, Morgan Moses is their highest graded offensive lineman, but he's suffering from a hip injury and going against Myles Garrett, so there's going to be another tough matchup. So this is another easy who you got for the Browns in their offensive line. Now switching over to the defensive line. This one's a tough one. This is let's just get into it. This is a tough one, obviously, because you have a lot of talent for the Cleveland Browns in their offensive line. You look at Myles Garrett, you look at Sheldon Richardson, you look at Larry Ogunjobi. Larry Ogunjobi, obviously, he's the number 1 or second highest graded interior defender. You look at Sheldon Richardson, who's always performed well as that veteran in the interior, and then Myles Garrett, who's that game record. And then your question marks this week is going to be Porter Gustin. Obviously, this is just going to be likely his first time being pushed up into that starting lineup. But if he's able to perform well along that defensive line, this could end up being a big game, for the Browns front 4. And also they have Jordan Elliott as well in the interior. And then you look at the depth. I think that's really the biggest thing with this Washington front 4. And this across the defensive line is the depth. Depth in the NFL is very important because it gives you the opportunity to bring out your starters, to have them to be more fresh later in the game, but still be able to have pass rushing productivity or, being able to stop the run. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan, Ryan Anderson. You have 4 solid players at your defensive end rotation. Then you move on to the interior. You look at Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Matthew Ioannidis, who's one of the highest graded pass rushing interior rush defenders. That's a lot to deal with when you constantly have players that can come in and provide solid reps for you on the defensive line. Now, this might be shocking to some, but I'm going to give the slightest edge to the Washington football team for the defensive line group, just because one, they have so much depth and they don't have as many question marks around their edge defenders. Obviously, Olivier Vernon's out. Look at Adrian Claiborne; he's suffering from injury, and then Porter Gustin is stepping up, into that starting role. But again, they just have too many players along the edge with Montez Sweat and Ryan Kerrigan and Ryan Anderson for me to sway in the Browns' favor. So I'm actually going to give this first who you got to the Washington football team and the better defensive line because of their depth. Now moving over to the linebacking core. This is pretty much the Browns' weakest unit versus 2 stronger players for, the Washington football team. You look at Sione Takitaki, who's been, one of the higher graded linebackers for the Browns in terms of run game. He's been relatively well. BJ Goodson in the middle field in coverage, obviously he struggled. We need to see him improve this week. Obviously, like I said, the Washington football team has the weakest tight end group in all of the NFL, and it's time for B.J. Goodson to step up in terms of coverage in the middle of the field. Malcolm Smith, obviously, is a veteran player that can, grades well in coverage and someone that you can rely on to make the smart plays. And we're just hoping that, again, this linebacking core can just find some consistency, especially in coverage in the middle of the field. B.J. Goodson is obviously the person to look at. And you look at Washington, obviously they only run 2 linebackers, but I have to give this who you got to Washington. Obviously, their front 6 really gets the slight edge over the Browns because you know what to expect from them. John Bostic is a player that is going to be on the field, that he's going to make the smart play. He's always just going to be around the ball. And then Kevin Pierre-Louis is the 4th highest graded linebacker. He has the highest overall coverage grade when he's covering tight ends. And they have Kalike Hudson, and they also have Thomas Davis Sr. I don't know if you guys know this, but Thomas Davis Sr. from the Carolina Panthers was essentially a perennial Pro Bowler, during his prime. And, obviously he is getting on the back end of his career, but he's still someone that can, blitz the quarterback at that linebacker position. He can, play in coverage. He can stop the run. And again, just that depth, but you know what to expect, out of that linebacking group. Thomas Davis Sr., this is his first game of this season, but again, just another veteran player that has Pro Bowl talent. And then Kevin Pierre-Louis is just building upon another strong season. So I have to give this one to the Washington football team. Obviously, the Browns won across the board in offense, but the Washington football team is definitely showing a lot more with the front 7 and what they have on the defensive side of the ball. Now, going over to the corners, this is another tough one, but I'm actually going to end up giving, before we get into it, I'm going to give this one to the Cleveland Browns. Why? Because they're adding more talent, to that cornerback group. You look at Denzel Ward, even though he is suffering from a groin injury, I expect him to be healthy enough. Obviously, he's going to play this week. He's going to be covering Terry McLaurin, and obviously the performance that he put up against A.J. Green, he's going to look to build upon that. You have Money Mitch. He's obviously been playing well on the outside cornerback. You get Kevin Johnson back in the slot. You don't have to worry about Tavier Thomas too much this week, playing in the slot. Obviously, because you have Kevin Johnson, but he's going to be another player that obviously has had starter reps at that nickel slot role. And then A.J. Green, who got promoted this week, will likely get some outside reps just to give Denzel Ward a breather. Then you look at what Washington has in terms of their cornerback group. You look at Kendall Fuller. Obviously, he struggled on the outside. So there's some questions of where will he play this week? Will he be on the outside? Will he be in the slot? So there's still some questions about that, but I likely expect him to be in the slot because that's where he found success. Ronald Darby, obviously, at the 12th highest graded corner in the NFL with the 72.3 grade. He's obviously going to be facing up against Odell Beckham, which is going to be a tough matchup for him, no matter who Odell Beckham is going against. It's going to be a tough matchup for that opposing corner. And then you look at Jimmy Moreland, who wasn't, graded the best in terms of coverage. And I just don't see a lot from him in terms of being, that game-changing corner that they would really need to make a huge difference. So I definitely expect the Browns to take advantage of that matchup, with their receivers. But obviously, I have to give it to the Browns and the better cornerback group, obviously, because they're greeting more talent with players being healthier along that cornerback group. Now, wrapping up the back end of the secondary with the safeties. This one, obviously, you have one decent safety for Washington with a below average one. And then you have a below average and a poor playing safety for the Browns. So this one I'm going to have to give to the Washington football team just because we haven't seen enough from Carl Joseph and Andrew Sendejo. And the biggest question of the whole secondary still remains Andrew Sendejo. Can he find consistency? Can he be in the right spot at the right time? These are questions he still must answer. But, maybe we could see Ronnie Harrison step up in a bigger role finally this week, being with the team and understanding the defense after joining late in training camp. But you just hope that Andrew Sendejo can figure it out. But you look at Landon Collins. He is the 26th highest rated safety, which isn't the greatest, but he has a 70.1 coverage grade, which is higher than both of the Brown safeties and Carl Joseph and Andrew Sendejo. Now, Troy Apke obviously has struggled in coverage. He's grading poorly just like Andrew Sendejo, but you expect them to perform a little bit better than what the Browns have in terms of safeties. So I'm happy to give this one to the Washington football team. So as you can see, the defensive linemen, the linebackers, I've gave to the Washington football team, and the safeties, really the only group that you can feel overly confident about in terms of the better defensive group is the Browns corners. But again, obviously the Browns have a very good defensive line. They just still have some questions as they're suffering from injuries in their defensive end group with Olivier Vernon and Adrian Claiborne. Now, obviously, again, the biggest thing for the Browns is just to continue to improve on what they have, and their special teams group. You want to see further improvement, from the defensive group for the Browns. But again, it all comes down to what they can provide on a consistent basis. Now, again, I just want to thank you guys again for checking out the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. Kickoff will be in about 45 minutes. The Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show is brought to you by Focus Clothing. Focus Clothing is a Cleveland-based clothing brand. You can check them out at focusclothing.com or focusclothingcle.com/shop. Also follow them on Facebook, Instagram. They also have Twitter. If you're on Twitter right now watching on Periscope, you can follow them at FocusCLE. That's CLE as in the abbreviation for Cleveland, and at Focus Clothing CLE on all social media platforms. They are the sponsor for this week's Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. All right, so we're going to wrap this up with the last who you got with the special teams comparison. We're starting off with the Browns. They have kicker Cody Parkey, who replaced Austin Seibert after week 1, who made all of his extra points last week, which is huge. Obviously, extra points was something that Austin Seibert struggled with. Maybe he should cut off that mullet and he may be able to make some extra points, but he's no longer with the team. So Cody Parkey, obviously, he hasn't kicked a field goal yet, so it's going to be big if the Browns do kick a field goal. That he's able to make one, because obviously Austin Seibert missed his field goal attempt as well in week 1. So obviously that's going to be big for Cody Parkey. Again, the Scottish Hammer, Jamie Gillen, another very good left-footed punter, which is huge. And then for the kickoff and return unit, you expect JoJo Natson to, at least get a big return. Obviously, Brandon Wilson for the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday night was able to run all over the Browns kickoff return unit. So you want to see them improve. But see JoJo Natson as well, just give a good return for the Browns and, give that offensive unit for the Browns, some better field position. Then you look at Washington football team. You have kicker Dustin Hopkins, who's been in the Pro Bowl. You look at punter Tressaway, who's also been very good, who's made a Pro Bowl as well. And then they have the kick returner, punt returner Steven Sims. So obviously this one I just have to give to the veteran group of Dustin Hopkins and Tressaway. And then also, just because the special teams unit for the Browns is a little sketchy with the kickoff unit. So obviously we're hoping that Mike Prefer can step it up. Now, going into the 3 keys of winning this game, which is very important, because the Browns have an opportunity again to go 2-1 and be over 500 for the first time since 2014, which would be huge, obviously, for the Cleveland fan base to see an over 500 record, and then to go into their matchup against the Dallas Cowboys next week, which would be huge. So the 3 keys: 1, running the ball. The foundation of this group is running the ball, and they're going against a very strong defensive line group. And if you can run the ball successfully and be able to utilize play action passes down the field, it doesn't give the Washington football team front 4 the opportunity just, to go after the quarterback and just continue to cause pressure, because they won't be forced to throw the ball consistently if they have a strong running game. Second, interior pressure for the defensive line. If they can take advantage of Wes Martin and Wes Schweitzer, who has not graded relatively well thus far this season in pass blocking, that can be huge for, in terms of the defense improving and allowing the secondary to find some consistency this week. Obviously, they're getting back Kevin Johnson, and Ward is dealing with that knee and groin injury, and there's still some questions in the back end in the secondary safety group. But obviously, we want to see the Browns defensive line to continue to have another strong game. And you want to see Sheldon Richardson, Larry Ogunjobi, and Jordan Elliott, provide a little bit more in terms of QB pressure up the middle. Obviously, they have all graded well in terms of run defense. We just want to see a little bit more in terms of QB pressure in the interior. And then lastly, the biggest thing is turnovers. We really haven't seen any turnovers. Actually, we haven't seen any turnovers by this Browns defense. And obviously, the Washington football team has struggled in the first half, which will be a good opportunity for the Browns to get a turnover. And turnovers also mean more opportunities for the offense. If you're not forcing punts, which the Washington football offense has done plenty of times at punting the ball in the first half, you obviously want to see the Browns get some turnovers, even if it's not in the first half. Just get a turnover, this week. And then obviously you have Mac Wilson, you have Greedy Williams likely be coming back next week for that Browns cornerback group, and you want to see them improve. Again, I would like to thank you guys just coming out and joining us for the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. I will have this opportunity just to address some comments. So if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them, in the comment section, whether it be on Facebook or Twitter. So there's some questions. There was one by Jay Mula. I won't be playing the game live. Obviously, that's not one of the things that I can do, for legal reasons, but you can go ahead and go to the SI website, which is si.com/NFL/Browns, and figure out different ways to watch the game. And then also you can check out as well the YouTube live stream. If you have any other questions, you can leave it on there. But also, we do have a live game thread over on the Sports Illustrated website where I'll be giving live updates throughout the game. And if you're not listening on the radio or watching live on television, you can come in and join the comment section with me, Pete Smith, and Brandon Little as we give our opinions, and then again updates of what's happening throughout the game, whether it be injuries or how the team is playing. So again, I'd like to thank you guys for coming out to the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show. My score prediction for this week is going to be 24-10 with a Browns win. Obviously, we want to see Baker Mayfield improve again along, passing and just limiting, those turnovers while again establishing the run and making sure that Washington football team defensive line doesn't wreck this game, especially Chase Young. So again, I just want to thank you guys for coming out and joining the show. Feel free to follow me on my socials. I'll go ahead and throw that up one more time. Again, my name is Sean Stevenson. I will be hosting the Cleveland Browns Tailgate Show every single week that there is a game. Follow me on socials, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I do follow back. Again, just some more discussion. Thank you guys for joining. That's at SHWN Stevenson, and we will see you at the live game thread. Peace.